The future of progressive radio. This is the Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here in studio. The one, the only, Xorje Olivares. You know him from his own show on Sirius XM Progress, Affirmative Reaction, Saturdays 12 to 2 p.m. Also producer on John Fugelsang's show, writes for various publications, and he's in studio. You can watch him on Facebook.com/Dean of Radio. Xorje, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Dean.
It is cold. We are not designed genetically for this weather. It is a polar vortex.
Disgustingly cold.
I am half Sicilian, half Palestinian. I'm designed for beaches and deserts. Like, this is weather for like a Lannister.
I
Like
grew up in the desert, essentially, South Texas.
Right, so you're designed for warmer weather too. Yeah. This is not for us.
Not at all. It's the sad part is I think the latest number is at least a dozen people have already died because of the temperatures. Most of them, I'm assuming, are homeless individuals. And something that I tweeted earlier today, which is still a statistic that boggles my mind, is the fact that if we're talking just about youth, homeless youth, 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. Wow. So even here in New York City, there's a section called the Christopher Pier, and everybody knows historically that the pier is where a lot of the queer kids go when they don't have a home. So I think when we leave here tonight, it's going to be one of those where it feels like -4, -5. And I mean, something that I take for granted is the fact that I have a coat. That's something that I don't even think about. That's a privilege that I have to have a nice coat with a jacket, like a scarf and all these things to protect myself. But that's not what a lot of people have, which is sad.
And you have a place to sleep.
Yeah, and I have a place
warm.
to sleep.
I mean, hopefully in New York that we have a pretty decent infrastructure of. If people want to go to shelters, I don't know how safe they are, but they're there. I don't, I have never done any kind of reporting or have experts on to talk about the New York City homeless shelters.
Well, one of the things that I've had a chance to do with my specific LGBTQ church ministry is we've done outreach to Covenant House, which is a homeless shelter here in the city. And something that we learn is that sometimes a lot of kids don't like going to shelters because there is this mentality that people kind of are in desperate need for certain things. And that's where there's a lot of stealing. That's where there's a lot of sometimes altercations because everybody has been dealing with this traumatic nature of being out on the streets, that it's hard to trust somebody. And not only that, when you realize that somebody might have something of value to them, and that can be used, it's a tough situation, a tough thing to navigate. I understand the importance of shelters and what they do to help people in that transition period of hopefully getting their footing. But a lot of people within the shelter environment don't like the idea of bouncing around.
And you're wearing a cross now, and we've talked about your Catholicism and your connection to faith, and I have a strong belief in faith. I have to ask you a question, though. As a Christian, Sarah Sanders said tonight, I think God wanted Donald Trump to become president.
Oh, my God.
So do you think, is God the Republican God, because it's not a normal God, the Republican
God,
God,
the white cisgender billionaire God that is out there.
The Republican God is okay with sexual assault, demonizing Muslims and Latinos, and lying nonstop and paying hush money. That's the Republican God, because it's not the God that we all believe in, right? That's not the same God.
Because the God that I grew up going to church and worshiping and having this relationship with is this God that you're of this mentality that God sees everybody as an image and likeness of his son and of himself.
Right.
And so that means the queer person, the Latino person, the Muslim person, the woman, the queer woman, the trans woman, we are all supposed to be made in the image and likeness of God. And also if we're meant to think that he comes to us in the least of our brothers and sisters, just based off of the marginalized communities we see today, that's everybody. And so for Trump to think that...
Well, Sarah Sanders said, I don't even think Trump would say God, because Trump Trump did everything himself. So like Putin didn't help him, God didn't help me, I did this, I'm bigger than God, hashtag God, losers, low energy. Yeah. Like Sarah Sanders was on Christian Broadcasting Network and said that. So it's the GOP God, GOP, GOD.
That's
it's
probably
a unique
what it
God.
is.
It's not a God that we all believe in. It's not a religious God. It's a political God who wants to... Oh my gosh.
But the weird thing is, especially since the election of Donald Trump, is seeing the fractioning of what Christianity and Catholicism, specifically in my case, has been for people.
Right.
So you see the people who are very much adamant about aligning themselves with Trump, and even being really nasty to people who don't agree with Trump. And when you think about the tenets of Christianity and you wonder, like, are you really loving your neighbor the way you should if you're attacking them for their identity, attacking them for their politics? No, not so much.
So let's talk, and this is a good segue in a way to the horrific case yesterday that we learned about with Jussie Smollett, who is, as people know, he's an actor on the TV series Empire. He's openly gay, came out in 2016, I believe. He was assaulted in Chicago by two men, and according to all the reporting, the offenders battered him. They hurled racial and homophobic slurs. It's the quote here right from the police report. The offenders began to batter the victim with their hands about the face and poured an unknown chemical substance on the victim. When the police went to his home, Jussie, he had a noose on his neck. I guess he wanted to show them, this is what they did to me. I understand that. And today, the reporting was, quote, police said in a subsequent meeting, Mr. Smollett added his assailants referenced President Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," during the attack, because that was rumored, but now he actually said it to the police. And folks are like, if you say you can say anything to the police, because people on the right are saying, oh, he's making it up, whatever. If you make a statement, false statement to the police, you get charged with a crime. This is not like tweeting a lie. You make a false statement to the police, it's a crime.
You yourself are liable for that
statement.
You think
Jussie Smollett? So I don't want to get into the right wingers who don't believe this is true. When you heard this case first, what was your first reaction when you first heard about this?
Devastated. Like the idea that somebody who has, and by all accounts, and there are a lot of people that I follow who feel this way, specifically within the queer realm, but he is probably one of the most visible queer people of color in the entertainment world. And the fact that something like this could happen to him, even though we've seen numbers of people who have been the victims of hate crimes, the fact that he can just be wandering out, and somebody said, because by all accounts, it was like 2:00 in the morning.
Right.
He was out getting food, if that's what the stories are reporting. Right. But like people saying like, oh, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. But
should have gotten food?
Yeah, like this idea that we need to be so cautious about who we are and how we go about our lives, because otherwise we are just prone to violence. Like that, it just completely upsets me. But this idea that people are forgetting the intersectionality about this entire situation, where some people are saying that it's homophobic, but not saying that it's racist. Some people saying that it's racist, that it's not homophobic, and trying to erase his experience. Granted, we don't know the experience. Only he can tell us what that experience personally was. But the idea that the media coverage of it, and even the response from people who are supporting him, that there's some sort of erasure within it, shows just how difficult it is to be a queer person of color in this day and age. So a lot of us have been navigating this world, and I say it all the time, that I think being an openly gay person, specifically during a Trump era, is a very political thing to do.
Sure.
And I take for granted the fact that I live in New York City, and it's a very welcoming place by all estimations. But this idea that anybody can use your identity against you, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And yesterday, it was proof that not even celebrity could save someone like Jussie Smollett. And the way I phrased that made it sound very fatalistic, but it's a dangerous time. And the fact that post the Covington situation, where a lot of people were trying to, especially within the media, were trying to uphold these kids and uphold anybody who wears the MAGA hat as misunderstood or just not getting a chance to fully explain themselves. When you find situations like the Jussie Smollett story, where you have people saying MAGA country or using that phrasing as a means to go about and attack people and use their hatred for just horrible things,
right.
It's hard to not even think that those two aren't one and the same, that MAGA and hatred, MAGA and bigotry aren't the same thing. And the people that are victimized because of it are the ones that have always been victimized throughout the entire society. And so I really hope people pay attention to, and something else that was circulating online is, we have to understand that queer people of color have always been victims of violence. And I think now, with the Jussie Smollett situation, people are recognizing that we need to be talking about trans women of color who are also being victimized. We need to be talking about the people in schools, like these young kids who are being victimized, and nobody's really trying to figure out what the repercussions are of that, because like with the Kevin Hart situation, that is why people were so hard on Kevin Hart about that first homophobic statement, because it was attacking Black, gay, and queer people. And so this is that actualized. When a Black gay person, somebody who was a punchline to someone like Kevin Hart not too long ago, that somebody like him was victimized, and victimized to the point where it incorporated all aspects of his identity, that should be something we need to be fearful of and mindful of in this particular moment in our political time.
Do you know, by the way, and I'm just curious, I didn't read anything on this, I was looking, the area where Jussie was attacked, was it an area where there were gay bars or
I don't think so.
So it's kind of, because these men who did this attack had a noose with them and bleach.
And just bleach, yeah.
So they went out that night. So I was just wondering if you had heard anything, if it was because, or did they target him? I mean, the day before, he was on Reverend Al's show on MSNBC.
Yeah.
I mean, so he's a very visible guy. So it may not have been his fame couldn't have saved him. His fame could have been the reason he was marked for being targeted here, because they wanted to really attack someone well-known to send a message to the rest of the community.
I think if I read it correctly, I think Empire is filming in Chicago.
Right.
And so people might have understood, like, maybe that's where the filming was taking place. And they knew, okay, this guy's going to come and we'll just be ready for him. Because it's so intentional. The bleach, the noose,
unbelievable. Think how heinous this is.
Exactly, and also the use of the slurs. I don't want to omit the fact that the slurs were used, because that in and of itself is violence. And so, hearing the word faggot, hearing the N-word, hearing words that have systematically been used to oppress us, in addition to the actions of the noose and the bleach and the punching and all these things, it just further shows that people who ascribe to the different identities that Jussie does and others, that this is something that, even though we would hope never happens, that somehow our body has been prepared for it to happen to us, because society has essentially told us that there are people out there that exist that could actually do that to us.
Do you feel, are there times in your life in New York that you've been concerned for your own safety, that you have to think about where you're walking and what you're doing?
Well, so it goes both ways, in the sense that there was a time when I was with my then boyfriend on the subway, and we weren't even being overly affectionate. I don't even think we were being affectionate, but in the corner of our eye, we saw this guy, and he was giving us the stare where you realize, like, oh shit, something's about to go down.
Really?
And I think he realized that, because when the train stopped, he got really close to us, and it seemed like he might have, it almost felt like he was about to take a punch, and then he just quickly exited. And so I remember looking at my then boyfriend, and I said, "Did you think he was going to do something to us?" I said, "Yeah, I was afraid the entire time." And that's in a very public space like the subway. There was a period, I think maybe in 2012 or 2013, where there was just not mass, but there was at least a couple incidences in Hell's Kitchen and in the West Village, which are historically pretty gay-friendly areas in New York City, where gay men were targeted and killed.
Yes, I remember that.
There was one time, I think his name is Mark something, and I feel badly for not remembering his name, but he was not even, maybe blocks from where the Stonewall Inn is, and just shot point blank in the head. And there have been a few other times where in Hell's Kitchen, where I go pretty much all the time with my friends, there was somebody who was attacked, and I think that broke his leg, or like it was a violent thing. So there are times when I think, okay, I need to be more careful. And then there are other times where I realize, because of the course of the fact that I do this show, Affirmative Reaction, and I'm kind of out there in terms of talking about my queer identity. Not only that, but I'm a gay Mexican guy. So there's different parts of my identity that make me a little more susceptible to someone's hate, and makes me more fearful of what that could actually turn into. My parents are very big about telling me, like, just be careful of what you say, just be careful of what you do, because there are people who hate you for each of those identities, and for both of those identities combined. And I think all people of color, but specifically queer people of color, are very cognizant of the areas that they go to, the people they associate with, what times they go out, when they go out, how they present themselves. But even then, when it comes to the idea of how I have to change my presentation of life. Like, I understand that I present myself a little more masculine than I do feminine, but there are certain things that adhere to people's stereotypes of what a man might be that makes it easier for me to go about living in this world. If I was a bit more effeminate, or if I did things like painted my nails or grew out my hair, or presented in ways that upset people, then I feel like I'd be even more fearful for my life. So I think that's also another part of it, this idea that it's a matter of quote unquote straight passing and what is passable to certain people and what's okay to not inflict violence on. And I think we've noticed over the past several years, and especially during a Trump era, that people who just don't adhere to certain societal norms about what people are supposed to look like, what men are supposed to look like, what women are supposed to look like, that people who don't agree with your presentation will then show you in very violent ways why they feel a certain way about that.
Have you altered the way you would want to dress or a way you would want to appear in public because of concerns about threats or physical actual attacks, even here in New York City?
I think I did. When I lived in Austin, I did. Okay. But then again, it was maybe 19 to 21, like it was in college area. So I think that also had to do with the fact that I wasn't as comfortable in my skin as I am now. At this point, I feel like it's going back to my earlier statement about the fact that it is a political statement to be able to stand forth and say, look, I am who I am, and I'm very unapologetic about who I am. I try not to hide myself or try to turn myself down in certain ways, if you know what I mean. But I think there are times where there's certain neighborhoods where I just won't go because I know that people like me aren't necessarily welcome there. And that's a choice I make. And unfortunately, other people have the opportunity to float around the city without a care in the world. I'm not one of those lucky people. And there's times where I can't distinguish if that's because of my queerness or if that's because of my Latino-ness. I don't know what is a factor in terms of why I feel the way I feel in certain areas. But the truth is I feel it. And I have to feel it, and that's the sad thing that I have to feel it. But I'd rather be in control of taking care of myself in those situations than being at just leaving it at the hands of somebody else who could do something to harm.
And I'm chatting with our friend Xorje Olivares. So, Xorje, I'm going to ask you a question now. You have to speak for your community. I'm sorry.
Which one?
So, we'll do the LGBT
Latino community, queer community.
For the queer community. In the time of Trump, yes, his rhetoric is terrible. Transgender ban is horrible. And Donald Trump's DOJ has reversed the view of the Obama DOJ, and they've actually argued against protecting LGBT community under the Civil Rights Act and arguing in favor of that an employer could fire someone simply because of they're gay. This is what the Trump administration's done. This rhetoric is horrible. Is there more anger to that rhetoric, or is there also a sense of actual concern that this guy, by these words and these policies he's pushing, is going to result in more hate crimes against our community?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think when it comes to almost right out of the bat, as soon as he was inaugurated, one of the first things he did was the trans-military ban.
Yep.
And the other thing he did was taking back Obama-era guidelines that protected transgender students at school.
Yep.
That was one of the first things he did. Why did he do it? Because, again, if you attack the most marginalized communities and you do it in mass, so it was like Muslim ban, transgender people, reproductive rights, all these different things that happened at once, people were forced to prioritize. And unfortunately, transgender people in the hierarchy of issues that the mainstream media and society were focused on, trans rights fell to the bottom. And so because we thought, and most people do, even within the LGBT community, they forget that there are things post-gay marriage that we should be focused on, that we should be caring about the trans murders, that we should be caring about employment discrimination, and that we should know that there are still dozens of states that allow you to fire somebody just for being LGBTQ.
There's over 20, I think I talked about.
There's over 20.
Right.
And this idea that also, not only the trans-military ban that is still pretty much on the point of being in effect, but erasure of trans people. There was that memo that was circulated a few months ago that said that people had to abide by the gender that was ascribed to them on their birth certificate, and essentially what was ascribed to them at birth. So a trans woman who was born biologically a male, that they would be forced to have to continue to use that identification even though it didn't match who they were. So that thing also happened. But the interesting part about the employment stuff is I've been covering LGBT issues for the entirety of my time here at SiriusXM. And the idea of us trying to focus on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which was for the longest time just stuck in Congress and nothing was being done because there were Republicans who said, I don't know if we should go that far to protect queer people for whatever reasons. I'm sure a lot of them were religious based. But then there's now the Equal Rights Amendment and opportunities to still try to make sure that we can protect queer people. And the thing about what the Obama administration did, which you mentioned, is they were saying that sex discrimination could work for queer people because of these, what I mentioned earlier about the presentation. If I present as male, or if I present more feminine than masculine, then I could, and you fire me for that, then I can say that it is because of your perceptions of sex that you discriminated against me. And that's how the Obama administration went with that. They were saying, look, perfect, sex discrimination because of perceptions of sexuality and how people should be. But the Trump administration, especially with Jeff Sessions, like, we don't want to do that.
No.
And so continued assault after continued assault after continued assault against queer Americans is really showing people, even though I don't know one queer person who was like, yeah, Donald Trump's our fan. But it's continued proof to queer people that this is what's happening. And I still don't want to discredit the fact that Mike Pence's association with Trump and the role that he has in the White House is another huge thing. And we won't forget the fact that he was very much a big fan of ex-gay conversion therapy, that he was the person behind the very first religious freedom bill that we saw nationwide. And so when you see these things,
don't forget that the faith advisors surrounding Donald Trump are people like Tony Perkins,
yeah,
who are on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of anti-LGBT extremists who have a long history of demonizing the LGBT community.
And there was the executive order that was protecting religious-based institutions so that they could discriminate against queer people.
And you have even people like Ted Cruz hanging out during the 2016 campaign with a pastor who advocated, or at least said, well, the Bible says kill the gays. Why? Don't yell at me because I'm saying it kills the gays. Known as the kill the gay pastor. And Ted Cruz saying that LGBT activists who wanted marriage equality, just marriage equality, were declaring a jihad. That was his term on Christians in America. This language, for the average person, they're like, it's trouble. I don't like the LGBT community. But for the extreme person, it could lead to the next step, which is violence. We've seen a spike the last, 2015, 16, and 17 per the FBI. We don't have the new numbers out for 2018 in hate crimes against blacks, Jews, Muslims, and of course your community as well, LGBT and Latino community. Yeah. You've seen the people Donald Trump has demonized, and words of a leader are not in a vacuum. The words of a leader, an elected official, could inspire good, bad, and ugly. And Trump has inspired great deals of ugly. I don't want to make this about the Muslim community in any way. We're talking about your community. I will say in our community, we've seen a huge spike in hate crimes, deaths, attacks, not death, thankfully, in 2018. 2018, we did see anti-Semitic terrorist attack at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. We've seen a big spike there. This is an alarming time. And Trump, to me, is someone who has emboldened those who have had this animus. He didn't invent animus towards marginalized communities. He's just made them feel better about themselves. And I'm more fearful of the future in a way. I don't know what's going to happen. That's why I was so mad. We were talking about the media narrative of Howard Schultz. To me is just driving me crazy. I'm not worried about Howard Schultz November 2020. I'm worried about Howard Schultz today contributing to a media narrative where Democrats want to turn America into Venezuela. We lose people in the middle, and somehow Trump gets reelected, when the stakes for our communities are very real. It's survival, frankly. I mean, it's the idea of someone in my community being killed, or your community. Just last week, I wrote about it. 4 young guys plotted to commit a terrorist attack in Islamabad, New York, a black African-American Muslim community in New York State, about 2 hours from here. One guy was a big MAGA guy, loved Trump, parroted his words. The media barely covered it. They were arrested and charged with, they had a mason jar full of explosive. The police chief said people would die. I couldn't get anyone on CNN or MS to cover it. I wrote about it for the Daily Beast. And you're like, we can't just go, well, this is life in Trump. We got to keep fighting this shit. It's scary times, my friend.
I think people seem to forget the historical nature of the demonization of the devalued, and how we are essentially going up against just centuries and centuries of marginalization and being told that we're less than. And it's only now where it's out in the open, like you said, that people feel comfortable in relishing in their bigotry and relishing in their hatred, because they say, if this guy can say what he wants to say and do so blatantly and do so with glee, why can't I? And so part of it is also this idea that we need to be looking to older generations who are imparting this hatred on their children. And that's why the Covington situation was very interesting. It's like, these kids just learn this out of the blue. Like, society helped with that, but also the family helped with that, and just triggers around them helped with that.
Mom blamed black Muslims.
Yes,
his
exactly.
mom, there weren't black Muslims there. There were black people, but they weren't Muslims. But still.
But I think it is something that worries me. It's something that I'm constantly trying to figure out, because somebody said on my show a few weeks ago, they said, I think it's definitely going to get more violent than we know that it's going to be before 2020.
Yes.
And
sadly.
That's and it's a sad realization, and it's something that I don't want to be the case, but I'm sure there are communities out there who will say it's always been violent for them. And it's only now that it's become more, torture porn and weird things that we've seen on TV circulated and have become viral, that we see just how violent it is, even though it's been that way forever.
We have to take a break, but look, when you look at the FBI numbers, it's quantified objectively. Hate crimes have gone up the last 3 years in a row, which is unheard of for 3 years in a row of hate crimes going up against these marginalized communities. It's not a coincidence. And towards violent, we'll go to a break, but I can tell you this, the history has told us in this country, when white supremacy is challenged, violence is one of the tools in the arsenal they use. And that's what scares me, because white supremacy is going to be literally challenged by demographic change, not perception, but it is going to happen. White people will become the minority at some point. So that real threat there worries me, how some on the extreme edge, not the mainstream ones, will react. Let's take a break, come back with more of our friend Xorje.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Voting is the most important civil right of our era, because the right to vote preserves all other rights. It's not the Second Amendment. It's not guns. It's voting.
SiriusXM Progress.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
Welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're here for the hour in studio with our friend Xorje Olivares, host of his own show on this very channel every Saturday, noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, producer on John Fugle's Sang Show. You were giving me a little education here before we get into how Trump says that Hispanics love him now. You were saying people use the term Latino or Hispanic with elected officials means something.
Yeah,
I thought they were interchangeable. What does it mean?
No, so I
Explain.
feel like especially people who are very much in that world and very much are part of their Latinidad, they like to use the word Latino because Latino is the word that the community gave itself. Hispanic is the word that was placed on us by the U.S. government for the sake of the census. And so it was just created out of the sake of categorization. So there are very few people that I know of, at least within the millennial world and even younger generations, that don't use Hispanic. They use Latino. And
so Latino is what we should be using.
Yes. I personally prefer Latino.
Right. I suppose when people say Muslim, they go Muslim. I'm like, stop saying Muslim. It's not Muslim. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but if you recognize a lot of presidential, even in 2016, the presidential candidates and a lot of the people who are out there who are making a name for themselves for the Democratic Party are very clear about using Latino. They say Latino, and sometimes they even say Latinx, which is the gender neutral way of saying Latino. So that way it encompasses.
Latinx. Interesting. I didn't even know this. I like learning. This is excellent.
Yeah. So
Latinx, folks. So what would you prefer?
For myself?
Like if I was going to talk about your community, you're not here. And
I go with Latino. I say Latinx. If it's the word Hispanic has not come out of my mouth since college.
All right, so Latino is for a male because the Latina is for a woman.
Yes. So it's redundant to say a Latina woman because it's a Latina.
Right.
But people normally say the Latino community. They don't say the Latina community.
Right.
But in order to make sure everybody's included in all that, now a lot of people are saying Latinx. So that way the A or the O, which makes it gendered.
Makes me think of Malcolm X. That's all I'm saying. It's kind of cool. And I like Malcolm X. I'm sorry, guys.
But it makes it so that it's not gendered, so that way it incorporates everybody. But most Republicans and Trump and everybody else who's aligned with him say Hispanic. And I think that shows, one, that there's nobody in their world that tells them like, maybe use this word because this is the word that actually people are using.
Excellent.
And also I think it shows that older generations do use the word Hispanic still. And when you think about Republicans, you mostly think older generations. And those might be the ones who are supporting Trump.
Right. A comedian friend of mine years ago, and the reason I would use Latino more, because I just remember her saying Hispanic, but it'll be in articles. She says Hispanic is the word spick in it. It has spick in it, and she said, I don't like that. And within the word, she goes, so that, and she didn't give me the whole genesis the way you did. Like, we didn't give this name, but she goes, I don't like the term Hispanic because of the word has spick in it, and that's a slur of our community. I'm like, wow, that's interesting.
I think, and I hope that I don't, because we were talking about slurs earlier, I hope I don't hear either of these words used against me, but I feel like if somebody were to call me a spick, that would hurt more than being called a faggot. And I think that has to do with the fact that it just sounds harsher if you say spick.
Interesting.
Any slur that is said isn't said without any level of harshness. But I think there's something about that one word that just cuts a little deeper. And I think something that's important to the conversation about slurs, since we did mention it earlier with the Jussie Smollett story, is it is not on me to tell somebody how they should react to a slur being used against them. Nobody should ever tell you how you should feel about a slur being used against you. If you feel a certain way, if it triggers you, if it's traumatic, if it imparts violence to you like it normally would to anybody, you have a right to feel what you feel about a slur being used. And so for this, especially people trying to downplay the use of the slurs for Jussie, or even the use of slurs, and it doesn't have to be like spick. It doesn't have to be that. It can be animals. It can be MS-13.
Right.
It can be these other forms of slurs that this administration has used against Latinos, that shows that they are not at all friends of the community.
So speaking of the use of Hispanic by people, Donald Trump tweeted, when you look at the Hispanic poll, so there's a special poll, there's a Hispanic poll.
Yeah.
This is literally his tweet. This is from a week ago. This is Trump's tweet bragging that Hispanics love him. He goes, when you look at that Hispanic polls, I'm up 19%. And the reason I'm up 19%, I think it's the fact that they understand better than anybody what's going on at the border. So apparently in his view, not Latinos, but Hispanics anywhere in the country.
Anywhere
if
in the
you
country,
live in
know what the border's like.
Minnesota, but by nature of your genetic, your DNA, you would of course know what's going on the border. Because even though you could be Hispanic and actually be from Spain, doesn't matter to Donald Trump. Latinos, in his view, you're all tied by your genetics and you understand the border.
I can even tell you, as somebody who grew up on the border and literally his entire life is still back home on the border, I have some similarities, but I probably don't have that much. It's hard to even tell somebody who lives in San Antonio, 2 hours away from my hometown, what it's like to live on the border, because they don't get it.
Right.
Even telling, like you said, somebody in Wisconsin, Miami, like those Latinos do not understand what border life is like. It's a very special lived experience. It's something that I'm very proud of coming from the border. It's being able to toggle between American life, Mexican life, and do so in a way that's been so conducive to just feeling like you're a part of it all. There's nothing like that. And there's also nothing like living in a community that has become ground zero for Trump's hatred. And driving downtown and seeing the border fence, driving downtown and seeing Border Patrol all the time, driving literally outside of my hometown as I do every time I leave, having to pass by Border Patrol and having to justify my citizenship. That is something that happens to everybody who lives on the border. So to say that Latinos who live within the states further away from the border, that they get what it's like about that situation, they don't. And that's not to at all have this weird negative viewpoint about Latinos who aren't from the border, but to generalize, for Trump to generalize and say that Latinos are supportive of him because they know what's happening at the border, it's a bunch of crock.
It is. And by the way, because we have to go to a break, but just to clarify, there was one NPR poll which showed an odd uptick in Latino support for Trump last week. That's completely true. But experts, and there was a great political article, said there was questions about the methodology, but in any event, when you average together the last three major polls, The Economist, ABC, Washington Post, and Quinnipiac on Latino support for Trump, his average is at 27%. And in 2016, he won with 29%. So he's actually gone down from what his support was. But let's take a break. I want to come back and talk about in Texas what's going on, the GOP effort to disenfranchise specifically Latino community.
Voters, yeah.
So let's talk about that when we come back with our friend Xorje right after this. You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, where we crush Trump's lies every single day.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
to the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress.
Welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here, January 30th, in studio with Xorje Olivares. Tomorrow I'll be back live, but I'm only going to be here the first hour tomorrow.
What?
Exactly.
How does that work?
I'm going to moderate. It's like 4 blocks away. I'm going to walk in the tundra, but we'll be all live. Tina Dupuy will be co-hosting with me the whole show, but I'll leave after the first hour with Preet Bharara, the former U.S. attorney,
cool.
the Muslim Bar, sort of the Muslim Bar Association, which is kind of oxymoron, Muslim and Bar, but the Muslim Lawyer Association is having a big event here at the Hilton. They asked me to moderate the conversation with Preet, and it's cool, and I also want to try to get him on the show, so I'm going to walk away after that. So if you're just tuning in tomorrow, this time you're like, where the hell's Dean? I'm hanging out with Preet Bharara and trying to get him on the show. So let's talk about Texas. Horrible disenfranchisement, which kind of concerned me because Trump sucked up on it immediately on Twitter, meaning he might have some national ambitions to suppress votes. But in a quick nutshell, we don't have a lot of time, that over the weekend they announced in Texas, the GOP, that 95,000 registered voters were non-citizens over about several decades, over 2 decades. And there's all this question about had they been naturalized or not. There's a lot of BS surrounding this. It's clearly just about voter suppression, and it's targeting your community specifically. It's going after Latinos. Yeah. This is not with African Americans. They're trying to say that people who voted were not citizens. And what is your reaction when you saw this new attempt to disenfranchise?
A lot of people were tweeting about it after Trump mentioned it. Yep. But the thing that works against us, unfortunately, and this is part of the beauty of being Latino, is it's kind of hard to not see a Latino or a Spanish last name and automatically know you're dealing with a Latino. So if you see Rodriguez, Garcia, Gonzalez, if you see accent marks, then you know, like, especially if you're somebody who has a certain feeling towards Latinos, like, oh, Xorje Olivares, and maybe he's not from here. And the doubt, and especially if you have other people who are willing to feed into that doubt, makes matters a lot worse. But I think that what was mentioned in the story that you referenced about these voters was that there was no upkeep with the information that was provided to begin with. So there was a possibility, and a very strong possibility, that a lot of them became naturalized. So they were citizens, or they were members of the society who could do what they did. But there was no information followed up afterward. And so the number that's being used by Trump and members of the right to say that non-citizens are going out there and they're changing the results of certain things, it's not accurate. And I think something else that people need to realize is even before the midterms, there was this huge story about how there were a lot of efforts in different communities in which people were being turned away for no reason. And whatever reason then was given to them was completely arbitrary and just developed by somebody like a Ken Paxton or somebody who just is not a friend of the Latinos in the state, to make sure that they didn't have a chance to vote. Because Beto really did, specifically in Texas, Beto really did bring out Latinos to vote, but that might not have been reflected because of the people who were in charge of the records.
And let me remind people what happened in Texas on Election Day, that Cruz only won re-election by 2.7%. Justin Nelson, less funding, less known, almost beat Ken Paxton, who's the AG. He only won by 3%. And Democrats picked up a dozen seats in the Texas House and knocked out some of the most conservative members of the Texas House. So they're like, we can't win on the ideas. This is what happens. We have to figure out a way to prevent people in Texas from voting against us. And their calculation, we might lose a few Latinos who might be Republican, but I'd say they're going to vote Democrat, so let's disenfranchise whatever we can. And the way they're going to do it in this system is they're going to give people 30 days. They're going to send them a letter. They have 30 days to come forward with their proof, and if they don't, they're purged off the voter rolls. And the goal is just to disenfranchise Latino voters. There's no way about it. And what scares me is Trump tweet saying it's just the tip of the iceberg. It must be stopped. It feeds to a narrative that undocumented immigrants are voting in the election. It goes to the legitimacy of our elections, and it helps Trump and the people on the right try to impose voter ID and voter suppression laws. They're not voter ID, voter suppression laws.
Even after he won and assumed the presidency, he was still harping this idea. Well, all these undocumented. Well, he didn't say undocumented. He probably said illegal. He's all these illegals are voting. Whatever. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? You're literally just grasping at straws, trying to find another way to make sure that you can demonize brown folks because they've been an easy target so far.
Now, if this is the GOP's Latino voter outreach program, it doesn't seem the best. I mean, you almost lost. So instead of trying to reach out to Latinos, it seems you might be pissing them off. What do you think? You're from Texas.
Yeah.
You're a Latino. What do you think the reaction? I saw what the reaction of civil rights groups are down there, but what do you think the reaction will be of the average Latino to hear what Republicans want to do here?
So the thing that's scary is, the Pew Research Center came out with an article, I think it was today or sometime this week, that said that Latinos are going to make up in 2020 the largest minority electorate. Wow. And I think that beats African Americans by 2%. I think it's like 13%. 13% of minority voters, or 13% of voters will be Latinos, and that makes up the largest group of minorities. But the trouble with that is they are not the ones who vote the most. They have the most eligible amount of voters. So I think in 2020, it said that the number was 32 million Latinos will be eligible to vote. But the idea that all of them are actually going to go out and vote, pretty slim. And the reason for that is, I mean, it can be a variety of things. A lot of the reasons why people are arguing for Election Day to be a holiday are part of the reasons why Latinos could take advantage of that. But I'm hoping that people are as engaged as they should be in politics. I'm hoping that the shutdown is because the people who are not receiving back pay, the janitors and the food service, the contractors, all these people who are not receiving back pay, a lot of them are people of color who are in these fields. So if the border didn't do it for you, if you're Latino and you didn't mind about the border situation, if you're Latino who didn't mind about the wall, who didn't mind about the family separation, which is another dreadful thing that is continuing to plague this administration, if losing one or two paychecks is going to do it for you, I hope that's enough, because other things that have happened should have been enough. But I think continuing to see the atrocities of this administration is what's motivating people to see that Trump is no friend of ours and hasn't been for a very, very, very long time.
He's friends for about, according to the 538 average of polls, around 38% of Americans approve of what he's doing, and that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about the rest of us. And it's become, I think, abundantly clear for anyone who's paying any level of attention, even if you're not engaged at the insane level that we are, that you're like, I don't think Trump cares about me unless I support him. That's the truth. So I say all the time, Donald Trump is not president of the United States, nor does he want to be. He's king of his base, and that's all he wants to be.
But that's the thing. Like, I never thought that Obama, I feel like Trump operates thinking that he's better than everybody. And I don't think Obama thought he was better than the American people. And so when you have a leader, when you have somebody who is the leader of the free world and is supposed to be the most powerful person, when he operates as though he thinks that he has something on you or that he's superior, that should cause you to...
I would hope. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with our friend Xorje right after this.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're just watching Zerlina Maxwell from our channel on MSNBC. Jorge, we've got 2 minutes left. So Mitch McConnell today slammed the idea on the Senate floor of Election Day being a national holiday, as Democrats are calling for, because in his words, he said, "This is a Democratic plan to restore democracy, ? A brand new week of paid vacation for every employee, like to hover around, will cast their ballot. Just what America needs. Another paid holiday and a bunch of government workers being paid to go out and work for, I assume, our colleagues on the other side." This is the mentality of Trump, that Americans, we should make it easier to vote. The Republicans want to make it harder, especially if they think you're going to vote against them.
That's why I was going to say, I speak turtle, and if you translate, it says exactly, we don't want you to vote because we know you won't vote for us.
Yep.
And we've talked many times on SiriusXM Progress about how the importance of making it a national holiday to vote, because people don't get a chance to work. I mean, they would have to leave work in order to vote sometimes, and sometimes depending on the people who are just making it difficult with the voter ID laws, there's so many obstacles to be able to do something so part of our civic society.
It should be a no-brainer. And I bet you poll the average person, a solid majority are like, sure, make it a national holiday.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, most people want another holiday day off with pay anyway. So you get that. But Jorge, my friend, thank you very much for coming in, being here for the full hour. Jorge, where are you on Twitter?
People can follow me at JorgeO, XORJEO, or go to heyjorge.com.
And your show every Saturday, noon to 2 p.m. right
Reaction.
here. Or John Fugelsang's show on Insight Channel, where I used to be. Check him out there. He's producing it. Thanks very much. Folks, I'll be here tomorrow. All new live show. I'm on Twitter, where I'm needy at Dean Obadala. Facebook.com/Dean of Radio. Have a great night. Thanks for tuning in.